What is the most gruesome / gory thing you have ever witnessed in real life? Kevin Ware's leg snapping on live national TV. For the first few minutes they kept showing replays of it before they decided it was a little too gory for the general public. That was crazy to watch live. You saw the bench recoil and a few guys dry heaved. Waiting in line for some pizza in Brooklyn. It was a pretty hilly street and every once in a while you would see cyclists cruising down the road at car-like speeds. Well, one cyclist was wearing a backpack. The cyclist leaned back slightly and his strap got caught on his back tire. The spinning tire pulled the guy directly to the ground at high speed. He wasn't wearing a helmet and you could hear the sound of the back of his head hitting the pavement. It was like a pumpkin being thrown to the ground. Blood everywhere. Did he make it to the hospital? I hope he ended up being okay. The ambulance arrived and the guy was moving his arms. The cyclists with him felt it was safer not to move him. I didn't stay to watch, but he was receiving medical care from EMTs last I saw. We had been up all night partying and heard a tremendous crash outside the house. We run outside and see that a car had come off the freeway. There was a lady laying at the curb and the vehicle had come to rest down the street. I run up to the woman to see if I could do anything and realized I was looking past her forehead into her brain. Seeing as I couldn't help her, I ran to the vehicle only to have the occupant reach out to me and take his last breath. Talk about a ruined high. The world is full of random tragedy. Yeah, hate to see it. When I was 14 I saw a motorcycle versus semi. The guy on the motorcycle got caught in the truck's axle and was dragged about 40 feet before coming to a rest face down. When we flipped him over, half of his head was missing. His face got dragged on the asphalt, leaving a 40-foot long trail of blood, skull fragments and brain matter. I had nightmares about seeing his brain leaking out of the right side of his face for a long time. This one is more recent. Happened maybe 6 months ago. My parents live in the middle of nowhere, and I was stopping by to take care of their dog while they were on vacation. I immediately smelled a horrible smell coming from a pine tree farm that my uncle used to own right next door. I followed the smell about 1/2 mile into the woods to my parents' closest neighbor. This guy was in extreme isolation, living in a small shack he made in the middle of the farm. No power, no running water, no driveway, just a shack, chicken coop and some free roaming goats. He's lived there since well before I was born, and apparently we were the only ones who knew he was out there. I only ever saw him once before, when our dogs escaped and ran to his place, at which point he threatened to shoot them if they came on his property again. Anyway, when I got closer I saw all of the chickens were dead and mostly skeletonized. I figured that must be where the smell came from and started walking back before it clicked in my head. Why would he let his chickens starve? I came back and approached the house. The door was just a piece of particle board with hinges and no lock. So I knocked, waited, then slowly opened it. A cloud of flies came out and the smell was horrible. I found him in the middle of the room laying face down on the floor. He was badly decomposed. Basically loose skin on bones, surrounded by human soup. The cops told me it looked like he'd been dead for about 2 months. Sorry for the textual. TL. Doctor, guy got brain splattered on road and another guy got rotten. JFC. That's some shit. Pretty brutal. My favorite comment in the thread so far. Someone's hand went under a ring grinder, removed the 1-inch strip from the back of it, ground some bone away after cutting all his tendons. We mopped up a lot of blood that day. I'm right there with ya. When I was 17 I was hired at a meat market. Day 1. While I was being shown the ropes, you'll start on cleanup, stocking, then work your way up to processing and serving the customers. One of the processors wasn't paying attention to what he was doing, splitting chickens through the bandsaw, and ran the bandsaw between his second finger and ring finger, and got it almost to his wrist. I didn't come back for day 2. Friend of mine got the same injury working on a car engine. When paramedics arrived, he had the presence of mind to hold up his injured hand and say live long and prosper, apostrophe. Saw a man get his skull smashed in by some guys with bricks. It was 2008 and I was in Athens. The sound is what has stuck with me the most. Big yikes. The sound is always the thing that makes me cringe the most when it comes to gore. I was a security manager for a series of hospitals in my state. I went from site to site, kept schedule coverage, handled PTO requests, and filed timesheets for my subordinates, but about half of my job was on foot. I patrolled the halls, manned security stations, and handled disorderly or combative patients. Blood and minor violence were things you needed to be comfortable with, and I was good at my job. I was called in when a patient needed restrained, be they soft or hard restraints. I had to use my handcuffs once, but it wasn't an overly physically job. Most situations could be solved with conversation and an intimidating presence. It helped that I'm 6 feet and weighed in at around 220. One day, I got a call over the radio while I was training one of my new SOs. There was a disturbance in the parking lot between a patient and his wife. He'd been given a terminal brain cancer diagnosis and was telling her that he refused to go through treatment. I called over the radio and told her, so they called for to let me have it because I was already nearby. I walked through the main entrance and asked the parking attendant where they were. He pointed me to an sub in the front parking area, and I walked toward them. As I approached, within 15 feet of the vehicle, I saw a reflection, then a flash and a loud bang. The man had put a pistol to his head and pulled the trigger. I turned around and screamed, "Get me a effing medic," and ran to the vehicle. I dragged the wife from the car screaming and caught a momentary glimpse of the man. Let's just say, it's not like what the movies show. The blood was pulsing from the front of his head. The flow pattern was like motor oil out of a jug. It was very laminar in form. Since that day, I have flashbacks anytime I see that same flow pattern. Wow, that's horrible. That reminds me of the video of Bud Dwyer committing suicide on live television. You're right. It's not how they show it in the movies. That video traumatized me. I can only imagine what the real thing did to you. A friend accidentally deeply cutting arm from wrist to elbow. Could see the tendons and everything in there. Surprisingly, kept my cool and helped cover the wound and walk him to the nearby hospital. Sounds like a bad day. Hope they're doing well now. Yes. Fortunately no major damage and all healed up nicely. Pulled over to check on a one-car accident. Young guy, maybe 30, tossed into the passenger side of the car. The car spun out and hit a traffic control box. His head hit the passenger side window. He was unconscious, but breathing blood in and out of his nose. This happens when your TM, the sac around your brain, is ruptured. It isn't survivable. He has his hockey stick and other sports equipment in his car. He was young and in good shape. If he would have been wearing a seatbelt, he would just have been a guy with a total car. I looked him up on Facebook. It was very sad. He was loved by his family and friends. Please wear your seatbelt. Fighter pilots do. Race car drivers do. Such an unnecessary death. Yes, if this thread teaches anything, seatbelts and helmets. In my small town early 2000s, a guy randomly stabbed a girl coming home from basketball practice. After stabbing her in the abdomen, he kept walking through the town repeatedly stabbing himself in the stomach. The cops followed behind closely with guns drawn. Not sure why they never shot. Anyway, he ended up on my street and slit his throat a few doors down from my house. What a first comment. That's insane. Did the girl recover? By the luck of something out of this world. She was outside of a pharmacy at the time it happened. She crawled inside and they were able to assist her before an ambulance could arrive. She's doing great now aside from a few scars. Typically on the anniversary of the incident, she reflects and reminds everyone how wild life can be and to cherish the moments we have. A local dairy barn burned to the ground with cows, horses, and sheep trapped inside. This is the saddest post in the thread emo. I value animals' lives over humans a lot of the time. So many beautiful creatures burned alive. How terrible. She / he is talking directly about you downvoters. Probably mild compared to the others in the thread, but once when I was on the way home, I saw this dude on an e-scooter cruising down the side of the road. Suddenly he just fell over. He seemed to have hit his head pretty hard on the road. I was like, oh duck, so I ran over to help him up. He was up by then, but his hand was ducked bad man. His ring finger and pinky were snapped back at some ungodly angle, and I'll never forget the white of the bone showing through. I asked him if he needed an ambulance, but he stopped me and scooted away. Still have the image in my head. Absolute Chad just getting up and riding his scooter off the Mayo. Going into shock is life-threatening. Suicide by train. Found out a couple days later it was my friend's dad. Big yikes. Hope your friend is doing well. This was probably 6 to 7 years ago. He's doing okay. I'm not gonna go into much details about it because it was pretty traumatizing for me, but thank you for your condolences. Young fella. Going about 80 miles per hour. Lost control of the motorcycle. Flew about 20 feet. Landed at the base of a 10 feet wood pile that didn't give at all. This is right across the street from the country club. In fact the pole was for the golf car crossing sign. So his chest is collapsed. Ribs sticking out and all that. The you know who would do emergency C-section a year later to save my wife and child. Did a tracheotomy with a box cutter and the plastic tube from a big pen. The doctor would suck out the blood, spit it out and repeat. The young man died. How unfortunate. Yeah, hates to see it. Good doctor though. Takes some guys and knowledge to be able to perform like that. When I lived abroad, I witnessed mob justice carried out on a person accused of stealing a motorcycle battery. He was first caught and beaten before being run over by some motorcycles. I didn't catch all of it during the chaos as I was trying to get out of there, but I did catch one of the mob smash the alleged thief's head with the battery he was supposedly trying to steal. Jesus, motorcycles are a definite link in these stories. When I was younger I was an active horse rider. The lady I worked with, I was too naive to notice it at the time. Same with my parents, was extremely abusive towards animals and people. One of the mares on her ranch ended up getting caught up on some fence. Don't really know how it happened, but it was bad. Her entire side was skinned to the point where you could see muscles and her rib cage. Instead of putting her out of her misery gently, the owner took a gun to her head and blew her brains out. She didn't die right away. She laughed at the horse the entire time as it just convulsed and died painfully. I know it's not as bad as some stories, but I think about it a lot. Animal abuse is a terrible thing, and that woman should be in prison. She can't legally own animals in the state we're in anymore, but I know she puts them under her children's names. She also ended up on Live PD when it was airing, so oh well. I have more stories about this abusive monster though if anyone's interested. Some ducker posted people's heads crushed and their brains spilling out in a duckine group chat. The classic group chat shenanigan. Yep. I was scrolling trying to find a certain pic of a friend and I saw that, and I was watching The Walking Dead at the time he sent it, so it didn't really bother me at the time, but sometimes when I close my eyes I see their crushed faces every now and then. My dad was using his electric scooter on the commute to work and someone opened their car door and he rammed into it. I didn't see it, but he told me exactly what happened. He fractured his sternum and his chest hurt for a while afterwards, but he lived through the accident and is now a perfectly normal dad once more. Hell yeah, dad. When I was working at a chemical plant I saw a guy take a corner too fast in a fork truck and it flipped over. He wasn't wearing his seatbelt and got ejected from the seat far enough for the top of the cage to crush his head. I saw it all and was paralyzed for a moment by the horror of it. I shook it off, ran over and killed the engine. My co-workers came running and together we lifted the forklift off his head far enough to pull him free, but it was obviously too late. That stream of blood running down a nearby drain still haunts me. Former cop here. I've seen a 16-year-old with a gunshot wound to the forehead with his brains in the floorboard. A lady whose head hit a tree going at least 50 after overcorrecting. Looked kinda like a watermelon. The force of the wreck bent her Jeep into a V. Not necessarily gory, but a 2-month-old that spit up and aspirated. She was gone long before she made it to the hospital. A dude that had been dead a few days in his house with no AC. He was starting to turn green and maggots were eating him. Plenty of other stuff. The aftermath of my dad committing suicide via shotgun. The bone flecks and stringy pieces of brain on the ceiling were something I wasn't expecting. Not sure what I was expecting, but it wasn't small little pieces of brain hanging from the ceiling like small bits of noodles thrown up there. This was after police, or whatever, had already removed the body. They really don't clean up much. Hey, thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe.